One moment he was a cop with a badge and a gun. The next, he was stripped of everything: his power, his career, his reputation, brought down by his own arrogance. But it wasn't just any mistake. It was the kind that would haunt him forever. This is the story of the day he pointed his gun at the wrong person, an army officer who refused to back down. And the way it all ended, you won't believe it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Racism Watchdog for more powerful real-life stories. The sun dipped below the towering skyscrapers of New York City, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. The hum of traffic, distant sirens, and chatter of pedestrians blended into the urban symphony. Major Olivia Carter, a highly decorated army officer, stepped out of a coffee shop, her uniform crisp, medals gleaming against the fading light. She had served in war zones, commanded troops, and stood in the face of enemies abroad. But she never expected to face one in her own country, on a street she had walked 100 times before, and certainly not with a police officer's gun pointed at her face. Olivia adjusted the strap of her bag and took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of roasted coffee mixed with the metallic city air. Her day had been long, filled with meetings at the local Veterans Center, where she worked tirelessly to support those who had served. As she turned onto a quieter block lined with small businesses, something caught her attention. A confrontation unfolding just outside a corner convenience store. A young black man, no older than 20, stood rigidly against the store's glass window. His eyes darted between the uniformed officer in front of him and the small crowd that had begun to gather. Officer Daniels, his badge gleaming under the neon store sign, loomed over the young man with an unmistakable air of hostility. "I already told you, I just bought this," the young man insisted, his voice edged with frustration and fear. He held up a receipt, but Officer Daniels barely glanced at it. "Then why were you acting suspicious?" The officer pressed, his hand hovering over his holster. "I wasn't. I was just waiting for my change." Olivia slowed her pace, instincts kicking in. She had seen this scene before, too many times. The rigid stance of the officer, the way his fingers tensed near his weapon, and the barely veiled disdain in his eyes. It was all too familiar. She had spent years defending justice, not just overseas, but in moments like this, where power was being abused. Stepping forward, Olivia placed herself between the officer and the young man. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Her voice was steady but firm. Daniel's gaze snapped to her uniform, and for a brief moment, hesitation flickered across his face before his expression hardened. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am," he said, though the way he emphasized ma'am carried an undertone of condescension. "Actually, it does," Olivia countered. "I serve to uphold the values of justice and fairness, and from where I'm standing, this young man hasn't done anything wrong." The crowd murmured, emboldened by her presence. A few raised their phones, recording the encounter. Daniel scoffed. "He was acting suspiciously. I have every right to question him." "And he has every right to shop in peace without being harassed," Olivia said, crossing her arms. "Unless you have actual probable cause, you're detaining him unlawfully." The tension thickened. Daniel's jaw clenched. "Step aside, ma'am." "I won't." For a moment, Olivia thought reason might prevail, but then, in a swift motion, Daniel's hand shot to his gun. The air in the street seemed to freeze. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Olivia's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared down the barrel of the weapon now aimed at her chest. "Step aside." Daniel's voice was low, threatening. The young man stumbled back, horror etched into his face. The crowd murmured louder, fear giving way to outrage. Someone shouted, "She's military. You're pointing a gun at a soldier." But Daniel's hand didn't waver. Olivia, her years of training kicking in, remained still. She knew better than to make any sudden moves, but deep inside, a fury burned. This wasn't just about her. This was about every unjustified stop, every abuse of power, every time someone was silenced under the weight of authority. And at that moment she made a choice, She wouldn't back down. Officer Daniels' grip on his radio tightens as he glares at Major Olivia Carter. The badge on his chest gleams under the fluorescent streetlight, his jaw set in a firm line of unchecked authority. "Ma'am," I said, "step back," he barks, his voice laced with irritation. Olivia doesn't move. She has faced men twice his size in combat zones. She has stood before commanders, debated military policies, and negotiated high-stakes operations. A single police officer's misplaced arrogance does not intimidate her. "Officer," Olivia says, her voice controlled, "I am not interfering with your duty, but I am well within my rights to question why you are detaining this young man." Daniel scoffs, shifting on his feet. "Lady, this has nothing to do with you. I suggest you keep moving." The young man, barely in his 20s, has his hands in the air, his face frozen in fear. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool evening air. His eyes dart between Olivia and the officer, his breathing shallow. "I didn't do anything," he stammers, voice cracking. "I was just buying a drink." "Let me see some ID," Daniels orders, his voice sharp, almost relishing the power he wields. The young man slowly reaches into his pocket, but the officer flinches as if expecting an attack. Olivia notices this, stepping slightly forward, her instincts sharpening. "Officer, with all due respect, what is the probable cause here?" she asks, carefully controlling her tone. Daniels shoots her a glare. "Who are you, his lawyer?" "No," Olivia says evenly, "but I know the law, and I know this isn't how it works." Daniels lets out a bitter chuckle. "Oh, you know the law?" He sizes her up, unimpressed. "Listen, lady, you don't get to tell me how to do my job." The young man hands over his ID with shaking fingers. Daniels barely looks at it before shoving it back at him. "You've got warrants, kid." The young man swallows hard. "No," he says. Olivia watches as Daniels leans in, getting dangerously close to the young man's face. The officer's hand remains on his holstered weapon, a silent threat. "Then why are you so nervous?" Daniels sneers. Tension crackles in the air. The small crowd gathering at a distance murmurs, their concern growing. A few have their phones out, recording the encounter. Olivia clenches her jaw. She has seen abuse of power before. It comes in many forms, on the battlefield, in boardrooms, and now, right here on the streets of New York City. She won't stand by. "Officer, I'm asking you again to de-escalate this situation," Olivia says, her voice calm but firm. Daniels turns on her, eyes flashing. "Ma'am, you need to leave. Now." Olivia doesn't budge. Daniels exhales sharply, shaking his head. "You have no authority here. I don't care if you think you're some big-shot attorney or activist." Olivia slowly, deliberately reaches into her jacket pocket and pulls out her military ID. She holds it up, letting the streetlight catch the official seal. "Major Olivia Carter, United States Army," she states, her voice unwavering. "And I have sworn an oath to protect the rights and freedoms of every American citizen, including him." She nods toward the young man. For a split second, Daniel's eyes flicker with recognition. Then, just as quickly, a smirk curves his lips. "Army, huh? That's supposed to impress me," he says mockingly. Olivia doesn't react. She has dealt with men like him before. "I'm only asking that you treat him fairly," she says. Daniel steps forward, now towering over her. "And I'm telling you to back off," he growls. The young man flinches. The murmurs in the crowd grow louder. "You are escalating this," Olivia says. Daniel scoffs. "You want to know what escalation looks like?" Without warning, he unholsters his weapon. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Someone shouts. Phones are lifted higher, fingers pressing record. Olivia doesn't move. Her heartbeat remains steady. Years of combat training take over. She sees every detail, the way Daniels grips the gun, the slight tremor in his fingers, the shift in his stance. But what she sees most clearly is fear. Not hers. His. "You have no idea who you're pointing that at, officer," Olivia says, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Daniels hesitates for the briefest moment, but his pride, his anger, won't let him back down. "Get on the ground," he shouts, his voice cracking. Olivia doesn't move. "Are you really going to shoot a U.S. Army major in the middle of New York City? On camera?" she asks, her tone eerily calm. Daniel's breathing is ragged now. The crowd edges closer. "Stand down," Olivia commands, her voice carrying the weight of years of leadership. The young man is frozen in place, his eyes darting between Olivia and the gun. The next few seconds stretch into eternity. Then, a voice cracks through the radio on Daniel's shoulder. "Unit 45, what's your status?" Daniels blinks as if waking up from a haze. His grip on the gun falters. Another beat of silence. Then slowly he lowers his weapon. The crowd exhales, some cheer. Others shake their heads in disbelief. Olivia doesn't break eye contact. "Now holster your weapon," she says firmly. Daniels hesitates again. Then, realizing he has no choice, he does as he's told. Olivia finally moves, taking a step closer, her eyes locked onto his. "This isn't over," she says. Daniels swallows hard. He knows it too. But what he doesn't know yet is just how much his life is about to change. The tension in the air was suffocating. The crowd stood frozen, eyes locked on the gun in Officer Daniels' hands. The red and blue glow of approaching sirens cut through the evening light, growing brighter by the second. Then, everything changed. A squad car screeched to a halt at the curb. The doors flung open and two officers rushed toward the scene. One of them, a senior lieutenant with salt and pepper hair and years of experience etched into his face. The moment he laid eyes on Olivia, his expression shifted from confusion to horror. "Daniels, stand down now," the lieutenant barked. The younger officer hesitated, his knuckles still white around the grip of this firearm. "I said, lower your weapon." The lieutenant's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Daniels blinked, looking around as if seeing the crowd for the first time. The stunned faces, the cell phones capturing every second, the unwavering presence of the woman in front of him. His breathing was ragged, adrenaline still pumping through his veins. Then finally, he lowered his gun. The lieutenant stepped in swiftly, grabbing Daniels by the arm and yanking him back. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Olivia exhaled, barely moving. Her hands remained at her sides, her posture rigid but composed. The young man she had defended stood a few feet behind her, still trembling. "Lieutenant," this officer attempted to unlawfully detain this civilian. Olivia said, her voice as sharp and commanding as if she were addressing a room of subordinates. "When I intervened, he escalated instead of de-escalating, and then he pulled a gun on an unarmed U.S. Army officer." Daniel's face drained of color. "She's military?" One of the other officers muttered under his breath. "Not just military." The lieutenant turned to Daniels, eyes filled with rage. "Major Olivia Carter. Highly decorated. She's probably done more for this country than you ever will." A ripple of murmurs ran through the bystanders. The weight of the revelation settled over Daniels like a lead blanket. The lieutenant took a deep breath, then turned to Olivia. "Major Carter, I assure you, this will be handled immediately." "Handled?" Olivia's tone was cold, unyielding. "Lieutenant, I just had a weapon drawn on me for doing the right thing. If I were anyone else, if I weren't in uniform, what do you think would have happened?" The lieutenant knew exactly what she was implying, and so did the crowd. The young man she had defended, whose only crime was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time, spoke up for the first time, his voice shaking. "I was just trying to buy a soda." Silence. The weight of that statement lingered in the air. A simple truth, carrying centuries of history behind it. The lieutenant turned back to Daniels. The decision was immediate. "Hand over your badge and weapon. You're suspended. Effective immediately." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. His hands trembled as he unhooked his badge from his uniform and placed it into the lieutenant's outstretched palm. Then, with visible reluctance, he unholstered his gun and handed it over. The crowd began murmuring, some shaking their heads, others watching with cautious satisfaction. "This isn't over," Olivia said. "Not by a long shot." Within hours, the footage spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. News stations played the video on repeat. Major Olivia Carter standing firm, staring down the barrel of a gun. The decorated army officer threatened on the very streets she had sworn to protect. By morning, the mayor issued a statement, vowing a full investigation. Protesters gathered outside the precinct. Civil rights groups demanded accountability. Daniels had been on the force for years, but it took less than 24 hours for everything to crumble. An internal review board convened immediately. The weight of evidence, the videos, the testimonies, the blatant overreach, was undeniable. A week later, the final decision came down: termination. Officer Daniels was officially stripped of his title. He had lost his job, his reputation, and any chance of wearing a badge again. But Olivia knew this was bigger than one bad cop. Because for every moment like this that was caught on camera, there were hundreds, thousands, that weren't. The story spread across the country, sparking yet another round of debates about policing, racial profiling, and systemic injustice. But the most haunting question lingered in Olivia's mind. Why did it take this moment for justice to be served? How many others weren't as lucky as she was? The video had saved her. The uniform had saved her. But what about the ones who didn't have those shields? This is just one story. The narrator's voice cuts in, the screen fading to black. But every day, countless others go unheard. Stand up, speak out, demand accountability. The final words appear on the screen. Because next time, there might not be a camera recording. What do you think about this situation? Should more officers be held accountable for their actions? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Racism Watchdog for more powerful real-life stories.